Thank you, Michelle. You know, you've never seen me pushing my belongings in a shopping cart. You've never seen me drinking cheap wine out of a bag on the corner. I've never asked you for spare change. However, I may have delivered you the newspaper when I started working when I was 12. We may have gone to some of the local schools here, Mills High School, San Francisco State, or USF. I may have prepared you a loan when I started my career. I may have given you a job when I started my business. I may have even rented you an apartment in Belmont. You know, by the time I was 35, I was a self-made millionaire. How could I become homeless? You know, I went from owning several properties with a beautiful home with my wife, with everything that a man could ever hope for, to hoping I could pay my rent, to hoping that I could pay a motel bill. Then one day I lost hope. I ended up with a room with a view. I was living in a 1992 Saturn station wagon with my cat Thelma on a rest area up on 280. Why? Because I'd blown all my money on cocaine and alcohol and the decisions that go along with that. I was a hope-to-die alcoholic. You know, despite several trips to the hospital where I was throwing up blood in parts of my stomach, and doctors saying, if you drink again, Steve, you will die. On March 6, 2009, I was sitting in my car, looking at the view, petting my cat with a can of Budweiser in my hand, just kind of sitting there thinking, once again, tomorrow I will be back as that captain of industry tomorrow. Instead, I had an alcoholic grand mal seizure, and I was rushed to the hospital. When I came to, my car was impounded, the cat was gone, I had nothing. Aurora, she's a social worker at San Mateo General, referred me to a homeless shelter called Maple Street. They gave me $10, put me in a taxi late at night, and off I went. A homeless shelter, I mean, terrified is not even a word I can describe how I felt. And I got to the homeless shelter, and this big burly man that looked like a prison guard greeted me. And I was scared, and you know, that gentleman was so kind and caring. It was the opposite of what I thought. And I was so weak, he had to practically carry me back to MT21, a 10-foot cubicle with a curtain and a bed. You gotta remember, last time I slept with a group of people, it was the Boy Scouts. So it had been a long time. You know, the next day when I woke up, I was still petrified. But the very first words spoken to me were, "Good morning, Mr. Carey." And it was a long time since I had heard that. You know, soon I met this guy called Craig. He was my case manager. And he suggested a 6-month rigorous in-house drug and alcohol program and told me that there's AA meetings 3 times a week at the shelter. It's the first time in my life that I admitted I had a big problem. You know that little cubicle that I lived in there for the next 6 months, and this became my castle. I mean, somebody actually donated golf clubs to a homeless shelter, but I grabbed them and I put them in my room. You know, there's no way I could afford to play. But just having them in my room reminded me of the life I used to have. And hope kind of started coming back. And I even started this little telemarketing business right there at the shelter, making phone calls in the garden. And after a while, I was making about $1,000 a month. And I had about 4 employees right there from the shelter working for me. Still the business guy. You know what? Shelter Network, you know, yes, obviously, they provided me with food. They provided me with clothing, and they put a roof over my head. But let me tell you something. When I walked out of Maple Street, I walked out a lot better man than when I walked in. You know, no better than that guy in the car with a cat, but a better man than I had been my entire life. You know, 21 months ago yesterday, I was a broken man. And if it wasn't for those doors at a homeless shelter called Maple Street, you'd see me pushing my belongings in a shopping cart, drinking cheap wine out of a paper bag, and asking you for spare change. You know, instead, last month, Shelter Network employed me as the property manager at the Van Dome. You know, now I get to use those old business skills and being that property manager. Every Tuesday night, I take an AA meeting back to that homeless shelter. Is this going to make me a millionaire? No. But I tell you what, if I get to help the next broken homeless person, I do this for free. You know, I get rewarded in a lot of little ways. My father and I now talk. On the 1-year anniversary of my sobriety, I called him. He came prepared to write me a check and write me off. When people ask my father, how's your son? Instead of saying he died alone in a car, a drunk, he tells them, my son got help and he's helping others. You know, thank you for your time, and thank you for helping programs like Shelter Network, because there's a debt there I will never, ever be able to repay. Thank you.